27th. It's slightly past 5:30, and this is a special meeting of the SVUESD. Our first agenda item is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you are able, either physically or based on sort of where you are in the moment, to rise, I'd invite you to do so and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, everyone. The second agenda item is public comment. So for the purpose of our minute taker, if you could please, when you share your public comment, identify yourself and the town that you reside in, please. And Scott, since you, as vice chair, since you're in the room and have better eyes on folks, would you mind facilitating this part of the meeting, please?
Sure. So opening it up for public comment. Okay. So I know we're going to have one electronically. Andy Hunt.
Yep, I can speak now, Scott, if you're ready.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So this is Andy Hunt. I reside in the town of Shasbury, and I am on electronically with you all to discuss the item on the agenda in reference to school choice. As you remember from the last meeting, I spoke about the current situation that my wife and I have with our daughter. So we have a 7-year-old. Our son is going into 2nd grade in Shasbury. And our daughter just completed the early ed program with Division Street, and we applied back in January for her to be accepted into Shasbury School as well. In April, we received a denial letter, and I attempted to find out why and to look at the appeals process, and was told initially from the supervisory union that there was no appeals process. But through some digging, I found what appeared to be, after we talked at the last meeting, was an old article from the Shasbury, the now defunct Shasbury School Board. So, but anyway, so I applied, or I appealed to the board back in April, and awaited to hear, and it's now been close to 60 days since my letter was emailed in. But you know, and from my understanding from the last meeting, we were denied because there's currently a waiting list where we technically reside outside of the district, even though we live in the town of Shasbury. We are in the area that is earmarked for the North Bennington Village School. And, you know, so what's being expected of us at this point is that we are to have 2 children in 2 separate schools on the same exact schedule. My wife, who is present in the meeting there today, is the primary person to do pickup and drop off. And on the days that she can't, and I can't because I'm at work, my mother-in-law, who is seated next to her, is also our primary person to do that. As I mentioned last meeting, my mother-in-law, Karen, is one of the primary or one of the few substitutes that Shasbury has. So in order for her to continue to be a substitute, she wouldn't be able to do pickup at North Bennington at the time that it releases, due to obligations at the school at the same time. So I'm here today because I came upon some paperwork. I know the last meeting we discussed that it potentially had been in writing somewhere about siblings having priority, and there was some discussion about if that ever existed, and it was relayed that never was in writing, or never had been anything that was in place. I have since come upon, and I emailed to Scott McEnany an application from the SVSU for school choice from outside of the district that did in fact have that clearly in writing on the application. saying that siblings, where there's a child already within the school, do get priority as long as there's room. And so that, like I said, I emailed that to Scott, I believe a week and a half or so ago. And basically what we're asking for tonight, I know there's going to be some discussion on the policy, but on behalf of not only our family, but the other family that's currently on the waiting list in the same exact situation, and the families of children who will be coming up who already have an older sibling in the school, I'm going to ask for the decision to be overturned, and that our children be allowed to join their siblings at the school. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Any further?
I'm Karen Aiken, live in Shaftesbury. I've taught in the district for over 30 years. Still, I retired, but I'm still there, subbing. So I know that as long as I worked in this community, the thing that was always stressed was support for families, that we partner with parents and we support families. And I think I understand the rationale for having the families within the SVSU getting priority, except that since we already have children from North Bennington in the school with younger siblings coming up, we are not supporting families at all when we create this kind of hardship where they have children in this school, and they're jockeying, getting them there, picking them up, and all the school functions. I think that we're kind of undermining the whole mission that we claim we have. So I think that needs to be considered. I mean, if going forward, you want to have a policy that says this is how we do things, I understand that. But I think that when you have half the family in school and tell the other half of the family no, because I know you're going to run into the same situation because you've got 2 girls there with more on the way.
I can speak next on my hardships.
Yep, go ahead.
So my name's Kathleen Cloud. I live in Shaftesbury. I have an older son who got a bus to where I live, went to Shaftesbury, graduated from Shaftesbury, moved up. I have a daughter going into 2nd grade at Shaftesbury. I have a daughter going into 1st grade at Shaftesbury. We were told we can't have a bus anymore. I understand. I get it. I'm willing to flex. I have 3 children that have gone to Shaftesbury. I have a daughter on an IEP that couldn't be fully accommodated to the extremes that she needed at Village. So we made the decision to move to Shaftesbury for her, thus continuing our children's education at Shaftesbury. I tried to, a year ahead of time, following the guidelines for my son, who's slotted to go to kindergarten next year at Shaftesbury, and was told that I have to wait on not to begin the paperwork. I've made several phone calls to the superintendent, sent emails. I've never heard back from anybody. I was told by Amy to just wait, that this is how it is, and that it's the decision of the board to make. I've got 2 children at Shaftesbury. What am I supposed to do with my other 2? I do all the pickups, all the drop-offs. I'm an emergency department nurse, RN. I make my schedule not so great for me so I can accommodate the lives of my family and my children. And now I'm looking at multiple children in multiple different schools. It's already hard when my preschooler gets out at noon and Shaftesbury releases half days at noon. I literally have a 5-minute window to race down that road to get all of my children and collect all of them in my car. And now I have to make it to Pownell, Bennington. It's just not feasible for my family. There's just no way for me to accommodate multiple children at multiple different schools. And then if I do try to get into a different school on a different waiting list, what's that mean for this one, my last one? Is she gonna end up in another school? I'm gonna wait list her somewhere else. So I get in at one school, she may not get in that same school as my son. And now I'm looking at how many different schools then? 4 different schools for 5 different kids. It's just not practical. It just makes sense to grandfather in the children that are already at these schools the best that we can. And then if you want to overturn the decision, then I'll be here every year until this one gets into kindergarten. Ms. Aiken said, I don't think you guys are looking at the hardships of individual families and how we accommodate the communities and the things that we do with our jobs, our careers, the extracurriculars that we do, the support systems that we think we have. And I feel, very like defeated because this is being made, I didn't get any notification until I reached out to start my son's kindergarten paperwork. And, the father of the kids, he's a business owner and small business owner. I mean, he can't do everything, so it's left upon me. So what am I supposed to do? I mean, would you want that for your children and your families to go to 4 different schools?
Yep, go ahead.
So Michael Greenleaf, resident of Shaftesbury, same situation as the other families. My daughter is in 2nd grade, entering 3rd grade. My son got the denial letter. He's supposed to be going into kindergarten. We moved here in 2020, right before the pandemic, and we are from the Midwest. All of our family and friends are back home, so we had no idea about the area. So we asked around, where are the local schools? We were told, you're lucky you live in Shaftesbury, you're gonna have school choice. So we started asking about the schools, and Shaftesbury is the one that continuously got the great remarks and great reviews. And so we chose Shaftesbury. We're like, this is great, great school. It's close to our home. And Isabel has thrived in school. Great relationships with teachers, the principal. Very, very blessed with the school. But then we got the denial letter, and our hearts just sank. We have no family that can pick up our kids and ensure an emergency situation. I'm the sole provider for my family, so a lot of it's on my wife to pick up both kids and then juggle after school activities. And our son, he's got an after school karate up in Manchester, and to pick up both kids from separate schools and then go to the after school activities is nearly impossible. She'd have to pick up both kids early, which impedes their education. It's definitely not feasible. And I, like the previous speakers have said, I've reached out via email, phone call, sent letters to Jim. Yes, I've gotten some responses, but the responses are, it is what it is, and he's on a waiting list. I mean, and that's just not feasible for our family. Like the Village School, nothing against that school. It's a great school, but it's when we already have established relationships in the Shaftesbury school and my daughter's going there, it's not fair to her to try to switch schools now. So we're just like these other families, we're just looking for this to be overturned and to find a way to get the siblings priority into the school district. So.
Thank you. Mike.
My name is Michael Gardner. I don't have the same particular skin in the game as perhaps some of the other folks here. My daughter is going into 5th grade at Shaftesbury. I'm going to be a little more blunt. I graduated from Shaftesbury Elementary School a long time ago. There was nearly 300 students there. There was over 300 students when I graduated from Shaftesbury. It's not a matter of capacity. It's a matter of resources. I was hoping Jim was going to be here with us virtually for this conversation. And I will say I was also a board member back when Shaftesbury had its own board. And I certainly wasn't the most popular one because I often was the tiebreaker to make some of these more difficult decisions. But I will tell you during that tenure, we did give preference to siblings. I didn't realize it was on the application for whatever Andy referenced earlier, but having sat behind that table, it was a discussion that came up more than once. So I think if we look at historical precedent, that should be part of the discussion. As far as capacity goes, when I think of capacity, I think of the physical capacity of a building. What we have is a lack of capacity regarding resources. We clearly don't have enough paras. We clearly don't have enough subs. There's moments where I wonder if we have enough teachers. So it's not physical capacity that we're talking about here. It's resources and how we're choosing to allocate those resources. Ultimately, that's Jim's job to figure out. Where people live is where their children should be going to school. And if we look at You want to go back even further into history and we look at how the boundary lines were drawn up between the ID district. They were literally drawn around the family members' houses of Don Daly because they wanted their kids to go to Shasberry, and some of the neighbors wanted their kids to go to North Bennington Graded School. That's why it's not a straight line, folks. Like, I mean, follow it down Elm Street and around the corner. It makes absolutely no sense that they drew the lines the way they did. They were effectively gerrymandered when they were created. So now that North Bennington Graded School doesn't exist, I personally would be a big fan of saying everybody that lives in Shasberry should be going to Shasberry School and not be given the option of going to a private school, but that's a different conversation. Ultimately, we have historically given preference for siblings. We created these school districts around the desire for families at that particular time to allow their children to attend school together. And I fully admit that the state of Vermont has done a very good job of making things twice as complicated as they need to be. But we have an incredible sense of community in Shasberry. And part of that is through our school. And whether they're in Perrin Acres or on Perrin Road or Twitchell Hill, we're all friends and we're all part of that same community. And I think as being part of that community and our kids playing soccer together and our kids playing Little League together, they ought to be going to school together. Lastly, I will say, I think it is significantly more important for us to give preference to siblings that might live in Lake Perrin Acres or down on Hawks Ave than it is to continually allow these students to come in from some of the Bennington schools when we have people that live 300 yards down the road that have their children on a waiting list. I think that's abhorrent. That's my 2 cents. I think ultimately, given the increase in the population, whether it's COVID related, non-COVID related, we need to figure out a way to allocate greater resources to Shasberry Elementary School as a result of the increase in the student population. But I think that we need to be articulating that in a much better way. Because when you folks talk about lack of capacity, most people think the school's just too small. It's not. I was there when Sue Green was there, who's still a music teacher and an absolutely wonderful lady. And she can tell you, as Karen probably taught back when there was a pretty good chunk of kids there too, that if you have the resources, that school has the physical capacity to handle the students. It's just a matter of the board assigning, and not only the board, Jim, assigning the resources to make our school continue to prosper. And honestly, it is probably the hub of our community. So if you're going to say it's a matter of capacity for these poor kids that are on these waiting lists, I think we should rephrase the discussion. But I would be a very strong advocate that you either create a policy moving forward, or we just continue the policy that's existed since the ID district was created, which was preference was given to siblings. And I can tell you, there's an awful lot of kids coming from Bennington schools that are taking these siblings, putting them on a waiting list.
Thank you. Any further public comments? Any on?
All right, thank you, Scott, for facilitating that. So the next agenda item is
Chris,
for
can I
us
just ask one question? So the 3 parents here, you all got denial letters this year for
Yes.
kindergartners?
Yep.
And
Not an official letter, but was told that it would be denied.
It was denied, okay. Just clarifying that.
And
Thank
for a kindergartner, or you're
My
you were a year out?
Yeah, I'm a year out. So according to the policy, it says to begin the prior year.
Okay.
And I was notified that they officially started accepting in December. And then I was told in the same conversation, well, you can try it again in the spring, but it's probably going to get denied or overturned.
So yours won't be starting in September?
Correct, this is
Okay.
next year. But
Next
clearly
year.
this is an ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just,
Yeah.
1 year out.
we're talking about 3 here.
So we
Yeah.
had 2 denial letters this year, that you'd be applying for next year.
And then 3 years after that, yeah.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So the next agenda item is the executive session. So specifically, we're looking to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA subsection 313F, which allows for the board to confer with its attorney. So I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session while also inviting the superintendent and our attorney into that, please.
So moved.
Thank you. Great. Any discussion on that motion?
Chris, can you invite the assistant superintendent in also?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so it would be the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, and our attorney. With that said, any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, very good. Assistant Superintendent Boudreau, could you please facilitate sort of securing the room for the purposes of the executive
So
session?
anyone that's from the public, I'm just gonna have you wait outside and then when they go into executive. Thank you. So, no, they are not actually. So, Jim, what would you like me to do with a breakup? Oh,
Everybody out here waiting, I can put them into the waiting list, so I'll put, just give me a sec.
Sometimes I hear about.
it goes down. Space.
All right, Jeff, now you can go ahead and make that motion if you would,
I
please.
make a motion to exit executive session.
So moved.
So we have a first and a second. Any discussion on exiting executive session?
No.
All those in favor of exiting, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we are now officially out of executive session. So a few statements of value that the board would like to make. First of all, regardless of the town of residence, one of the underlying philosophies that undergirds and supports the SVUESD is that all of the students as part of the SVUESD are our students, regardless of the town in which they live. And so the notion of kids from one town coming in and taking spots that some folks might think belong to students who live in that town is not compatible with that philosophy. So that's important to state right away. Another statement of value is that this board does recognize the value of keeping siblings together when possible, when doable. Here's a statement of fact. The incoming kindergarten classes in all of the elementary schools, with the exception of Shaftesbury at this time, are slightly in excess of the best standard of 15 students. Yeah, each of those classes will have between 16 and 17 students at this time, with the understanding that these things are always fluid and these things always potentially can change down the road. So with those things stated, and also with the understanding that what this board needs to take under as labor this summer is to craft policy to officially govern what we're dealing with right now. So with all that said, I would entertain a motion to approve kindergarten placement for the 4 families that are currently on waiting lists for this year, with the understanding that this action is not at all precedent setting as we move forward.
So moved.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that motion carries. So that takes care of the school choice part of this agenda tonight. Moving on, the next agenda item is the appointment of the Bennington Elementary principal. That we had discussed I believe we discussed in earlier open sessions, that Mr. Richard Arroyo had been interviewed and had been advanced as a finalist. He's toured the schools, and it is the recommendation of our superintendent that we appoint Mr. Richard Arroyo as the principal for Bennington Elementary School. So I would entertain a motion to approve that recommendation from the superintendent.
So moved.
Second.
Do we have a second, please? Very good. The first and a second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor of appointing and hiring Mr. Richard Arroyo as the Ben L principal, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any no votes? And the motion passes. So congratulations, Mr. Arroyo. Very happy to have you on board. The next agenda item is the discussion of the school resource officer. And Superintendent Culkeen, could you just please update us in terms of the requested increase in the rate for the current SRO?
Yeah, the rate would go to $65 per hour. The HR coordinator, Director Nick Gall calculates that would be approximately $95,000 a year. Versus we're currently paying $45 an hour for the SRO. And as you know, we have only one SRO, and it doesn't seem to be prospects of any others in the pipeline. So I did have Director of Finance Operations look. The sheriff is looking for a response from us on whether we're willing to accept that rate and keep the one SRO sooner rather than later, because they would like to begin. If we are going to retain him, they want to begin process to hire others because they were anticipating moving him.
And understanding the request, the hope is that we will give an answer sooner than later. Is there a drop dead date for when the sheriff's department needs a response from us?
The response to that question was as soon as possible.
Okay. So we have to take this under advisement. The board does, and we need to have the conversation. From my own personal take on it is this: that $95,000 is a lot of money. I think particularly for a non-instructional position within schools. What we've heard is that the deputy who currently serves as the SRO at the Shaftesbury School has a tremendous rapport with kids. Is a very positive presence within the school. But particularly as we're talking about admitting new additional students into the school, as we take a look at the resources that are deployed at that school, my feeling is that $95,000 can be spent more wisely at Shaftesbury. Additionally, if it was the will of this board to maintain an SRO and to pay $95,000 a year for an SRO, then having that person solely stationed at Shaftesbury might not also be the best way to deploy that resource. So I really think we have two decisions to make. One, does this board agree to fund an SRO to the tune of $95,000 a year? And if we do, where might that SRO be stationed? So I would open the floor for conversation on this.
If I could just start, it's hard to say we don't. Did we lose him?
No, he's still there.
No, okay. It's hard to say we don't have the money. We have $300,000 that's been in the ESD budget for school resource officers for the last few years. Important to say, or ask the question, is spending $95,000 the best use of dollars that could be reallocated and used for things that resources in the buildings, like was mentioned previously tonight? I'm going to have a hard time moving on any of it absent of a plan for security in buildings, not only across the ESD, but what is the plan for security in buildings and for all across the supervisory union? And I feel like our hand is being pushed to the point, or we're being forced to show our hand and act in a way because of the substantial increase that the elementary school district will have to pay for the school resource officer. And with that, I'm going to have a hard time until we hear from leadership of the SU or of the SU, what is the security plan to keep kids safe? Because at the end of the day, we have $300,000 earmarked to keep kids safe. We're only spending a fraction of it, and spending it in one place isn't necessarily the best course of action either. But absent of a plan, I don't have a better solution.
So one thing I would add, turn my camera back on, one thing I would add to that, Scott, is that the function of an SRO it's not a security based function. Certainly as a law enforcement officer, one would expect that an SRO, may have the capacity to act in that manner. But that's not the primary function at all. Additionally, the research, again, I will not say that the research that I've done on police presence, on law enforcement presence in school is exhaustive. And I'm sure there are far more studies and longitudinal studies that I haven't considered or I'm not even aware of. But of the research that I've looked, it seems pretty inconclusive in terms of whether or not the presence of law enforcement actually makes for safer schools. There's the whole phenomenon of people, seeking out places that are under law enforcement guard to, do terrible things and hopefully have their own life taken. Like that is a phenomenon that you see reflected in reference when it comes to law enforcement in schools. You have the question of hard targets versus soft targets. I guess all of which is to say, simply having a police officer in a school is not necessarily a guarantee that school will be safer. So when I say that, not to undercut your point, merely to add to that larger question of what do we do and how do we know we're doing the best thing or the right thing?
I'd also like to bring up the point of equity, and if we can't deliver for all schools, we shouldn't be delivering for one school.
And I would like to know what the safety Vic thinks about our elementary school districts and whether there's a different model that we could use that would also make sure that not only it's a safe school, but that we're allocating money where it needs to be.
I have asked Vic Milani, the SVSU safety coordinator, to do exactly that.
Thank you.
To give us an alternative proposal for what we can do with the 300,000 to protect or to offer services, safety teams to all schools. That's not possible because there's too many schools, but you may have a rotation through schools with multiple people is one proposal. But Vic is working on a draft of that and can present that to you if the board would like that to continue.
I find it difficult to make a decision without knowing what other options could be that would work for Shaftesbury and the rest of our school district.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to pay one deputy sheriff to be present at one school is going to be viable. Let's go back to when this all started and everyone had the best of intentions. There were going to be 3 Bennington police officers at the 3 Bennington elementary schools, and there were going to be 2 deputy sheriffs, one at Pownell and one at Monument. And as a reminder, we had 2. We had one at Pownell who left to take another job, left the sheriff's department and went to take another job. And the Bennington Police Department used to provide details at Molly Stark and Bennington Elementary School at one point when they had offices available, which my understanding is they are understaffed also and struggling to fill all positions. And they no longer even provide a school resource officer at the middle school. And they're going to a school-based safety team, which is what the high school has been using for a number of years. So I would assume that would be something that along that line that you would hear from Vic Milani about.
So since the sheriff's department has not given us a drop dead date by which they need an answer, and since we have in the pipeline Vic coming in to give a description of what currently exists, what emergency responses are, what the larger are. I think
I did ask him to have that ready by your August meeting.
Yeah, and I think in the interest of being able to make the best decision, we need that information to come forward. So I would be happy to table this notion until I hear from Vic, and we can have some more well-informed conversations at that point.
With the understanding the possibility that the sheriff's department might not be able to wait.
Well, I mean, if that may be, and you know, I guess what I'm about to say is no reflection on anyone who works in the sheriff's department, but that's a significant increase, and we need to make the right decision about spending that much money.
I think if you had to point out, it's, you know, big increase for 180 days worth of work. You know, so you're talking 95,000 for the school year. You know, so that's another thing you have to consider.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point.
So it's not 365 days, it's 180 days.
So, I mean, so that's my feeling. Anyone else have a contrary opinion? Okay. All right. So that exhausts our agenda. So with that said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
And my battery survived the meeting.
Okay, all right. So we have a first. Was there a second on the motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you, Glenn. All right. So we have a first and a second. Any discussion on adjourning? Okay. Hearing none. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Member of the
All right.
public.
I'm sorry?
I said just a member of the public. Generally, you have public discussions, public comments at the beginning of an agenda. And then when you go through more line items under Robert's Rules of Orders, you ask for additional public comments before asking for your meeting to be adjourned. So as a member of the public, I would just like to say that I think that was missed in this case. I have more to say, so perhaps I'll need to come to the next meeting.
Well, you're always welcome. So thanks very much, folks. We'll call the meeting adjourned, and thank you for everyone for participating tonight. Thank you.
Can I just clarify? So he said for the 4 families.
So,
My son's next year, so I
so
can get
what the motion that was passed, just to make it clear, and Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to approve the families that are waitlisted this year, which are, you know, the 4 families that are currently have kids going into kindergarten for the 23-24 school year. That can be a little more clear.
So what do I do for the?
Moving forward for the 24-25 school year, which would be you, our plan is to come up with a policy or procedure. Official
Policy committee that then brings their findings, admissions to us.
So it will be on the website as a clear policy, you know, if you want to tuition in or move into the district, whether it be school tuition from Sandgate, we're going to come up with a policy that's very clear, because I think, you know, that's what's missing right now.
The new policy is still like what you guys are pushing right now.
We'll create
The
one.
children will not be accepted at Shaftesbury despite.
Well, so in
that's
other
pushing
words,
that.
yeah, there's no function for us to approve placement of children who are not yet of school age.
I just-
So
I'm just
part of
trying to
what we-
plan forward is all.
Well, sure.
Hopefully have a policy by
Policy stating what? Just please be clear.
we have to create one, so
Well, that's what I'm inquiring about is
We
what.
can't answer your inquiry,
Okay.
because we don't have a policy.
unfortunately, because we don't have a policy.
Okay.
That's right.
But I would strongly encourage you to be part of the policy-making discussion as a member of the public, so that policy for the next 40 years, well, like when I was on the school board, it was just commonly accepted, but it was never really in writing. So they're gonna just put it in writing, and I think if people that are in the public become part of that conversation, it will be a well-thought-out policy that addresses everybody's concerns.
And you can
But you're
send,
gonna wanna not miss those meetings.
you can send questions or emails to the board or, you know, what you think would be appropriate. And we'll take those in advisement, I think. Like anything, we take any emails, goes into advisement or no.
You guys are all saints, you're volunteers, right?
So we're already.
Yep. Okay.
But thanks very much, everyone. All right.